So Vincent went home because things in Atlanta just didn't work out. That actually happened to me in real life once, and I think it's possibly the thing that pulled me into Cyberpunk 2077 at first. Anyway, he got back to Night City, and he didn't know what to do. Everything was diffuse and uncertain, and all he did know was that he wanted to make a mark on the world before he burned up in the corona of greed and suffering, haloing his whole world. There was no place for him in the corporal world. He couldn't squeeze himself into the few minuscule keyhole-sized paths to wealth and power, and he wouldn't have been able to, even if I'd chosen the nomad or corpo backgrounds instead of the street kid one. Because fitting into those boxes means cutting away at all the pieces of your soul. Okay, the soul. That's what Cyberpunk 2077 is actually about. Well, the soul, the hero, and the end of hope. But we'll go in order. So first we'll talk about the soul. What is the soul? Not a question we're going to get to the bottom of in a YouTube video game video essay. But let's say it's some essential but metaphysical part of you that might continue to exist were you to die. What's that in the context of a role-playing game? Because there are actually always two persons present when you're playing a role-playing game. Even a single-player one on the computer. There's me, the me from real life, peering through my magic mirror into this other place. Then there's the character I'm playing, the vehicle allowing me to participate in the game world. That's two persons, so maybe that's two souls, joined where the screen touches the body. In Cyberpunk, there's actually three of us. Me, V, and Johnny Silverhand. All three of us competing for who's in charge, who runs the show. You might think it's me, but in a game so free with slipping in and out of cutscenes as Cyberpunk, there were times I felt the other two getting away from me. And that, oddly, has its own kind of pleasure. Cyberpunk let me truly indulge my love of video game dramaturgy as I stage-directed V around Night City, lingering on certain half-deserted streets to look at things while one part of my brain pretended to be thinking the thoughts that V would be, and another part of my brain spectated this imagining for a perverse kind of pleasure. I also spent a lot of time looking in the mirror. Looking in the mirror is such a fascinating motif in Cyberpunk. How often do you have the opportunity to look at your character in other first-person games? So often I've spent half an hour or more tweaking my character's looks, and I never see them again. It's just a fantasy, a gratification in my head alone to let me enjoy the idea of people in the game looking at me as someone whose form projects a cool or sexy or wizardly vibe. But in Cyberpunk, you can look at yourself all the time. You can make faces to yourself in the mirror. You can change your look constantly. You can just stare. You can stare at your reflection and wonder, am I still me? Am I Johnny yet? You can try to remind yourself who you're supposed to be, who you're choosing to be, why you're playing a game of being V at all. The attraction of role-playing, at least for me, is in that opportunity to be someone else, to choose who I am in this other world, and in being that person, find a connection to an experience that would otherwise be inaccessible. The chance to be an awesome cyborg who can slice people apart with arm swords. But conversely, in Cyberpunk, I'm also experiencing what it's like to be totally doomed, dying of a terminal illness, and painfully aware that the time left on the clock is short. Though, much as we wish it weren't true, that's not so inaccessible an experience. We're all watching the clock, even if we're less sure how much time is left on it. At the end of Cyberpunk 2077, depending on how you've chosen to end things, within the abyss of Mikoshi, Alt quotes the first stanza of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock.
Let us go then, you and I. When the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels, and sawdust restaurants and oyster shells. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit.
That first stanza ends with a mention of the overwhelming question, which Prufrock admonishes the listener not to pursue. The overwhelming question is ever unspoken, but seems to be anchored in Prufrock's uncertainty about whether to act, particularly when it comes to women and sexuality, as well as his recurring fear of death, or perhaps more accurately, his fear that he's wasted his life with indecision. He goes on in a later stanza, "And indeed there will be time to wonder, do I dare, and do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair, with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions which a minute will reverse." Prufrock is a painfully modern protagonist, as we might expect from the work of T.S. Eliot, a pivotal modernist poet. Modernism, as a literary movement, rises out of the tremendous confusion and chaos of the first decades of the 20th century, the atrocities of the world wars, the overwhelming information overload of mass communications, the breakdown of the normative orders. Themes like these feed into the alienated blank despair that Prufrock feels. He is antithetical to the classical mode of the hero, devoid of lofty ideals or martial prowess, both qualities which Eliot and his contemporaries had seen go oh so wrong during the world wars. Prufrock even acknowledges his own weakness of character, his distinctly unheroic nature, in one of the poem's last stanzas. "No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Am an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two, advise the prince, no doubt an easy tool. Deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious, and meticulous, full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse, at times, indeed almost ridiculous, almost, at times, the fool." The Fool. That's the tarot card that represents V in cyberpunk, but in the tarot the Fool has a more positive meaning, which Misty describes for you if you ask. So V and Prufrock are both fools, but while V is one because he doesn't yet know who he is, naive and goofy and learning his path in life, Prufrock is a fool because he has become an inert mockery of himself, shredded by insecurities and incapable of even eating a goddamn peach. Bit of an incel, honestly, and someone who has failed to secure his identity, his soul, against the onslaught of uncertainty which comes with his modern life. "Secure your soul" is the tagline with which Arasaka sells the relic technology in Night City. Relics save a copy of a person's consciousness before they die onto a shard which others can then slot to interact with the phantom of the dead person. This is done using the ominously named Soul Killer program. Also, if inserted into a person who's dead or dying, as we learn painfully firsthand in the story of the game, the relic shard will start overwriting the dying person's mind with the personality it holds. Functionally, this promises immortality to the rich, saving their minds to shards, then plugging themselves into others to revive, specifically people with similar substrate to their own, so their children or other close relatives. That's very uncool. It points to a fork in the road for V, the happy and not yet Prufrockian fool. Secure your life as the powerful do, or secure your soul? To this broken world, I'm a lawless outcast. Oh, on the run. I'll challenge everything. I've just begun to start the riot. Start the riot. The desire to destroy, to disrupt, to lose control, to rebuild and then to tear it down again. Come join us on destruction, violence. Lately, I've had the somewhat dubious opportunity to spend a lot of time watching the movie Excalibur, directed by John Boorman. Excalibur is a crazy 1981 version of the King Arthur story, which is also a bit softcore. So I've also had a lot of time recently to think about Merlin. What's up with that guy? He comes out of nowhere, this magical guide with his own intentions. He finds this stupid kid who's very malleable and sees an opportunity to put the kid on a path to do what Merlin can't. Merlin's schemes are broadly kind of good. He wants the endless violence of kingless England to end, and he feels the only way to make that happen is to do more violence.
Merlin! Why have you done this to me?
Because you were born to be king.
What does it mean to be king?
You will be the land, and the land will be you. If you fail, the land will perish. As you thrive, the land will blossom.
But why?
Because you are king.
No!
Merlin reminds me a lot of Johnny Silverhand. I'm serious. Johnny's a type of mentor, albeit a shitty one.
Gonna be an ambush, no doubt. Just focus. You're better than them.
His hate's mostly in the right place, even if his politics are completely shambolic. It's kind of miraculous that he exists at all, and he's got a talented young person who he's putting on a collision course with inevitable death. That's not entirely Johnny's fault. He didn't ask to get put in V's head, but he also didn't have to encourage V to put their whole brief remaining life into taking down Arasaka and Adam Smasher. He could let it go. There are a few other, more obvious allusions to Arthuriana. The two most expensive cars in the game are called Guinevere, after King Arthur's wife, and Caliburn, another name for
Excalibur!
These are the cars you can only get once you're really rolling in the eddies, as if to say, you made it. You're really something now, just like King Arthur. Hey, whatever happened to him? Alright. He died.
How much longer is this going to go on?
There's another classic hero who's referenced in Cyberpunk 2077. During a gig, I think the one about rescuing the boxing coach from the tiger claws, I found a shard containing a passage from Homer's Iliad, one in which Achilles, the most famous hero of the Trojan War, exhorts his fellow soldiers to stop fighting, to go home. He acknowledges that he too could go home, that the prophecy offers him two fates, a long and sedate life, or great glory in war followed by a quick sudden end. He stays in Troy, and he dies, though not in the text of the actual Iliad poem. Another modernist poet, W.H. Auden, wrote a poem called The Shield of Achilles, which drew on Homer, as well as the horrors of the 20th century, to imagine warfare, modern warfare, as it might have been depicted in Homer's time. The poem's not super long. Maybe I'll read it here. She looked over his shoulder for vines and olive trees, marble well-governed cities and ships upon untamed seas. But there, on the shining metal, his hands had put instead an artificial wilderness and a sky like lead. A plain without a feature, bare and brown, no blade of grass, no sign of neighborhood, nothing to eat and nowhere to sit down. Yet, congregated on its blankness, stood an unintelligible multitude, a million eyes, a million boots in line, without expression, waiting for a sign. Out of the air, a voice without a face, proved by statistics that some cause was just, in tones as dry and level as the place. No one was cheered and nothing was discussed. Column by column in a cloud of dust, they marched away, enduring a belief whose logic brought them, somewhere else, to grief. She looked over his shoulder for ritual pieties, white flower-garlanded heifers, libation and sacrifice, but there on the shining metal, where the altar should have been, she saw by his flickering forge light quite another scene. Barbed wire enclosed an arbitrary spot where bored officials lounged, one cracked a joke, and sentries sweated, for the day was hot. A crowd of ordinary, decent folk watched from without, and neither moved nor spoke, as three pale figures were led forth and bound to three posts driven upright in the ground. The mass and majesty of this world, all that carries weight and always weighs the same, lay in the hands of others. They were small and could not hope for help, and no help came. What their foes liked to do was done. Their shame was all the worst could wish. They lost their pride, and died as men before their bodies died. She looked over his shoulder for athletes at their games, men and women in a dance, moving their sweet limbs, quick, quick to music. But there on the shining shield, his hands had set no dancing floor, but a weed-choked field. A ragged urchin, aimless and alone, loitered about that vacancy. A bird flew up to safety from his well-aimed stone. That girls are raped, that two boys knife a third, were axioms to him who'd never heard of any world where promises were kept, or one could weep because another wept. The thin-lipped armorer Hephaestus hobbled away. Thetis of the shining breast cried out in dismay at what the god had wrought to please her son, the strong, iron-hearted, man-slaying Achilles who would not live long. The world which Auden describes is one in which collective action, grand political movements, are no longer trustworthy because they give way to nothing but rapacious violence. Eliot and Auden had plenty of reason to feel wary of mass movements, despite their effectiveness and importance in terms of social change, because of what mass movements empowered by modern technology accomplished in the first half of the 20th century. It was unfathomable suffering and death at a mind-boggling scale. Auden identifies opposition to this world of death and individual actions, promises kept, those who weep because another wept. This is paltry in the face of intractable problems. It's not going to change the system at all, but it's what Auden looks to because the alternative has become entirely poisoned. The world on Auden's shield looks a lot like Night City. It's all violence, exploitation, cruelty. There are no mass resistance movements in Night City, just criminal gangs and occasional rogue actors like Johnny Silverhand. This stems first and foremost from the limitations of the genre. A first-person action RPG is literally locked into a singular personhood, and its content is fundamentally entwined with such a viewpoint. And a tabletop game setting has to glorify individual action without changing the parameters of its world very much. Game worlds are playgrounds for the players, and if we want them to be more than that, or to convey something higher than that, then we'll have to get a little bit more experimental with it than cyberpunk is. Beyond ludic philosophizing, though, the material conditions of Night City are deeply hostile to human community. The best example of positive organizing we see is the Aldecaldos, who notably live outside mainstream settled society, and whose way of life is deeply precarious and constantly at risk of being swallowed up by corporations. The Mocs are the closest thing to a workers' union extant, and they are actually a criminal gang run by one woman's fiat. Street Kid V can talk about being raised in the community of Haywood, but it's not enough to guarantee anyone there a good life, or to serve as a mode of resistance to corporate control. It topped out with an opportunity to join the Valentinos, who are yet another gang. And how would anyone in Night City fight back effectively against the police, when they've got not only every tool for repression in real-world law enforcement's arsenal, but also the evil robot from RoboCop? The Cyberpunk 2077 future is a dark future in so many ways, and one of the starkest is its demonstration of a world where community, mass movement, human solidarity are all so cheapened, so fungible, and so dangerous that they're impossible. Doomed. Arthur's doomed. Achilles is doomed. V's doomed. The best they've got is the hope of living forever in legend, or going quietly back to Greece to die small. Around the midpoint of the game, V and Johnny have a conversation about his scattershot politics and relentless resistance to Arasaka and corporate power. He tells us that this isn't just about the corporations or even his morals. This is our war on entropy. It's a war that can't be won. It's doomed. Night City, in the context of the game, is the whole world, a kind of synecdoche. There's no escape till the end, and there's no winning against the city because the world always wins. The world always wins because everyone dies and you can't change anything, not alone. Entropy is a natural law. But it's a game. Participation in the world of Night City reveals that you have some agency over your own conduct and the outcomes which stem from it. You might be a contract killer, but you can be a really nice one. Which, Arthur also kind of was. Achilles wasn't even nice. The experience of gameplay teaches you how best to exert your will over the game world. Not much of it. Your influence is limited, but just a bit. When I first began to play, I wasn't very good. I didn't know how to leverage my build super well, but in time I improved. Mostly at killing. But not only at that. In fact, the better I got, the fewer people I killed, as I began to learn the structure of the gigs, the language of the level design. And so I got better, and Vincent got more merciful. The play and the story were changing, unexpectedly, together. I still had to zero all those Arasaka gonks at the end, but nobody's nerfed, right?
Enemy contact!
Anyway, no amount of skill could avert the end. I could either choose to make myself a pawn of the government or the corpse, or I could die. It was then that V and I discovered we had been chasing the wrong thing all along.
Even if you pick one of the endings where you don't remain terminally ill with 6 months to live, you lose something. Go with what Reed's offering, and you'll have to send a woman back to hell instead of to the stars. Go with what Arasaka's offering, and you'll end up just like Johnny, drowning in a lightless digital vacuum for all eternity, or until they see fit to reanimate you as corporate property. Maybe you've hung on to your life, but you failed to secure your soul.
Golden ending, true ending, these are all gamer-ass discourses. The true ending is that you reach the end of hope, and you have to answer the overwhelming question, what am I going to do now? What was all this for? What's waiting at the end of hope? Not nihilism. Not some empirical proof that hope was justified because you're now rewarded for the hours you put in. What would that even look like? At the end of hope is faith. That what you did in the time of your life was worth doing. That the hours you spent in the world, in Night City, were of value. That the promises you kept, the tears you shed for Johnny, Carrie, Judy, Panam, Rivers, Songbird, Reed, I could go on, that they mattered, and that you mattered. The real cyberpunk was the friends we made along the way. I jest. The real cyberpunk was in V's faith that the fight to stay alive and stay V, despite everything, hostile world, corporate control, literal terrorist in my head, and in the last choice, whether to stay alive or stay V, that all that was worth it. It costs a lot to secure your soul, significantly, your actual life. But in doing so, V rescues the idea of the hero from the defeated place we left it with Prufrock, picks up the articles of heroism dusty from the days of Achilles and Arthur, and tries out to be another kind of icon. Eliot and Auden tell us there's no more room for the grand epic heroes who are so much higher than we can aspire to be, kings and the sons of gods. They've grown ridiculous and sad. And Night City tells us there's no hope for great change in a world only 2 or 3 more missteps from the real one.
Apropos of nothing, think our relationship might have taught me something.
V tells us there's still something to be admired in determination and an iron commitment to who you are. At the end of the game, in Mikoshi, if you decide to return to your body and let Johnny go with Alt beyond the black wall, the last thing Johnny says to you is,
Goodbye, V. And never stop fighting.
and you never do. It's a game. Action is your vocabulary. You choose how to fight, when, why. You choose whether to put more love and more good into the world, even though it's a black hole. Because it isn't just a black hole. You have to believe it isn't just a black hole. That's why it's so important that the NPCs call you and text you and bother you actively, because they're responding action to action, like to like, loving you back. Night City can't be saved, but there's still time to save the real world, I believe. And even if the movements I love fail, the future I desire crumbles, I gotta keep on, like V, living for myself, not in the selfish way that untrammeled capitalism encourages, fuck you, I got mine, but with an individual and indestructible selfhood, because that is what allows you to act in the world. I mean, truly act with judgment and sincerity, without being buffeted by reactionary winds. The last moment in the game is the litany of voicemails from V's friends and acquaintances, a reminder that Vincent's life was worth the living, and that the idea of V, however far gone he is now from the waking world, goes on, like Johnny, to perhaps miraculous effect, as they say.